folks, it is Friday. The mailbag is open, so it is a Freaky Friday on the Podcast Daily. That is Bill Landis, Jeremy Birmingham, and I am Austin Ward. We've got your questions. And first of all, we're back doing a Friday morning show. We know you've been loving 20 forever. We've been loving doing it. We got a quick break in the schedule or the release schedule here as we stockpile some of these interviews, and the Buckeyes will be coming back, the former Buckeyes now, for Pro Day next week. So we're hoping to knock out a bunch of those next week. But we had a little pause, and we thought we'd turn it over to you on subtext, and we've got a bunch of your questions. So first of all, it's just been an awesome week to be back in the Woody. 2 practices to watch, Bill. It's a great time of year.
Yeah, it was like basically real football was back, so that was good. Excited to be talking about like new things that we're learning and not just hypothesizing about what could be. So that's nice.
I'm not sure I would call it real football, what we saw, but
I said almost real football.
Yeah, I mean, I guess almost real football is as close as we're going to get to real football. It's like Spam being real meat.
But Spam can be delicious.
Yeah, I mean, almost real football can be delicious also.
Yeah. It's all great. And
what is your preferred Spam recipe, Bill? Do you have a go-to usage of Spam?
I've never actually made it myself, but I had it when I was in Hawaii. I forget what it's called. It's like fried, and it's like in a bowl with rice and some other stuff. I can't remember what it's called.
Is there pineapple in there?
Yeah, there's pineapple in it. Yeah.
Surprising. Those Hawaiians are one-trick ponies.
Wow. Coming after their cuisine. We're off to a flying start on this Friday. So since you seem to be in a wonderful mood, Berm, PK did ask, and I was going to save it for the end, but I figured it's March Madness as well. Ohio State is not playing in the tournament, and PK said, "Give me a little Berm Ohio State basketball rant."
What's there to rant about? It's inexcusable.
They suck. What do you mean? What's there to rant about?
I'm saying it's not even worth ranting about. It's an inexcusable product being put on the court right now by Ohio State, and it's been going on for 3 years. I've said it over and over in the last month and a half. Every time I watch a game with my family, or anytime I do decide to go on Twitter and let a thought loose about Ohio State basketball, it's just Groundhog Day. It's been Groundhog Day for the last 5 years. The same program, same team, same results every single game. A team that cannot dribble the ball down the stretch. I mean, it's as if for the final 4 minutes of every half, they think that it's okay to use your feet to dribble a basketball. I don't understand it. I don't know where you learned that. I've never seen a program go from being as good in out of bounds and down the stretch situations as they were under Thad Matta to what they are now. It is unbelievable how bad they are when it comes to just the basics of basketball. But whatever. Hey, one more year.
Besides that, it's good. Or
one more year of it. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going.
Calling your shot already. One more year.
One more year of futility, or one more year they'll be fixed. What is that prediction actually?
You know, well, the thing is, if we go back, you remember like the end of the Mark Loving era and how we were like, sometimes you need players to leave in order for the program to like culture shift. I didn't think that was the case with this group. I think like individually, I think Bruce Thornton and Devin Royal and a couple of these guys are like good leaders and people that other guys will fall behind and follow, but there's just something missing. And it's easy to just point to the big man and say, where are they at Ohio State? And why is Austin Parks, who's now in the transfer portal? He's not a all Big Ten caliber player, but anytime he was on the court, at least there was an effort being made. And yet Aaron Bradshaw continued to play ahead of him. And I don't know what has to happen. I've seen the reports this week from like On3 and other spots about Ohio State being one of those schools that they think will be one of the biggest spenders this offseason. And if they're not, then there's no chance.
Don't they have to be? I mean, there's no other option here.
Well, yeah, but again, some of that, it has to be just retaining the players that you want to keep. I mean, this was the conversation that Jake Diebler had to have a year ago when he took over, which was how do you retain Bruce Thornton? How do you retain Devin Royal? At that point, there was only 3 guys they were really interested in retaining on the current roster, and that was Royal, Thornton, and Felix Okpara. And they thought they had retained Okpara, and then he got poached by Tennessee. And if you're not going to go out and find really great players, then I don't know if there's any chance for Ohio State to get better. But if you look at the 2 big spending additions they had last offseason, and Sean Stewart and Bradshaw, it's like I think all they looked at was what their high school rankings were and not what they actually looked like on the court at Duke and Kentucky, because those guys weren't good at those schools either. So I'm not entirely sure why they expected to leave blue blood programs like Kentucky and Duke and show up at Ohio State and thought they'd be better. Like they were. Turns out they were worse.
Preach.
Anyway.
Yeah. All right. So not a lot that we can unearth for Ohio State basketball.
I love Jake Diebler. I want to be clear. Love the guy. I just think that hiring a coach from a program that was firing its previous coach is not generally a recipe for success. And I think Jake Diebler, unfortunately, long-term is going to have his career affected by it, because if he would have gone on somewhere else and been the coach at Eastern Illinois and then come back to Ohio State in 7-8 years, I think it's a totally different story. But I don't think that this is a like-for-like comparison where you take a guy like Ryan Day and you bring him on board as a first-time head coach from a winning program. This is not that fix, and clearly he's not ready for it.
The continuity that you wanted to maintain and then enhance from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day is not the same as Chris Holtmann to Jake Diebler. Like, that seems pretty obvious, but thinking that you could strike gold with a first-time head coach again, where did they come from? How did they get there? What was in place? Ohio State basketball was already broken, so I don't know that the person who was in there with the hammers and tools already is the one to get it fixed. But maybe Jake Diebler will prove us all wrong. As you said, he is a great person. I don't think I've never met anybody who would say that he's not, or that he can't form strong relationships, or that he's had success as a recruiter, or that they like him as the face of the program. Like, all those things are true, but the actual basketball stuff does not seem to be working, and it hasn't for quite some time.
You can flip a roster pretty quickly in basketball, rather dramatically, in one off season. So I guess they stand a chance to do that, but then I would still have questions of, like, do all that? Is the coaching still good enough? I don't know. I'm not an expert in it. I don't watch like every game super intensely like Berm did, but what I did watch was not great. And I myself was wondering what exactly the money was for with a couple of the transfer additions, because they weren't particularly good.
Let's just go down the list of Aaron Bradshaw, Sean Stewart, and Michi Johnson. And what did you get out of it? And that's something that forces you to take a real long look in the mirror and say, if that's our approach, we better have a much better evaluator looking ahead, because those three guys were not it. Michi Johnson, obviously the Ohio State ties, he's been there before. You figure he'd come in and be a leader at least, but he shot the ball like 86 times a game at South Carolina. And to come into Ohio State and be essentially replaced by a true freshman who was also shooting the ball 86 times a game at Ohio State, like in Junie Mobley, like I just feel like, man, you maybe just didn't look deep enough into the transfer portal, because as you said, Bill, you can replace players and turn a roster around, but if you don't have an elite coach to get the most out of them, then I don't think it matters. And we saw that at a couple different schools this year. One of them, unfortunately, 40 minutes from where I live, that made very similar sweeping changes to its coaching staff and roster that Ohio State did. And the Buckeyes passed up on Dusty May, and Michigan didn't, and he won the Big Ten.
I thought you were talking about the Pistons.
Who's their head coach now? Blake Griffin?
Well,
have you noticed Blake Griffin being in a bunch of commercials lately, like for Red Lobster and stuff?
He's back, baby, and he's sitting on fake chairs. That covers our once a year Groundhog Day conversation of Ohio State basketball. Let's move on. It is spring football time. There is a coaching staff question. It comes from Grant, and he said, I guess it's too early to tell, but do you think this is the best staff Ohio State has ever had? I'm really impressed with the new additions, and the existing coaches are excellent. All seem to be great recruiters too. I do think that, and Grant said this, it is too early to tell. That's a bit premature. And the one that they had last year just won the national championship. And there was a really good one a decade before that also won a national championship. Those are the two best in the 14 years that I've been covering it. Berm, you've got a wider, longer perspective on this. Best coaching staffs ever. I think the potential is there, but we've also been talking a lot about the youth and relative inexperience, even though Billy Fessler's been coaching for a long time. Tyler Bowen's been coaching for a long time. I guess it's just age and not always an experience conversation, but they haven't coached a game together yet. And Brian Hartline hasn't called any plays yet for Ohio State. We might have to tap the brakes a little bit.
You have to tap the brakes a lot of it, I think.
I would have the brakes firmly on the floor. Their coaching staff last year was excellent, and they won a national title.
I don't know how you, without seeing games in action or how the offense, I don't know. I don't think you can replace Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles and assume that you have a better staff when you replace them with a guy that hasn't coached in college in 25 years and a guy who's 29 years old, who's never been a full-time assistant except for about 3 weeks last year when he was hired by Chip Kelly at UCLA before Chip left for the Buckeyes and Billy Fessler lost his job at that point. So no, it's not better. Let's not be ahead of ourselves. Now, long-term potentially, absolutely, there's a chance for this staff to be really, really great, but I do think there's other arguments. The 2014 staff was excellent. The 2002 staff, if you remove Jim Bowman from that staff, who is obviously did what he had to do as the offensive line coach, you had Bill Conley, Joe Daniels, who's a legendary quarterbacks coach, Mark D'Antonio, Luke Fickell, Jim Haycock, Mark Snyder, Tim Spencer, Mel Tucker on the staff. Like that's a pretty good staff back in 2000.
Yeah. And again, it's early and I think there's good reason to be excited about it. So I'm certainly not like, I don't mean to mock the question from Grant, and I appreciate that he sent it. I think this could have the pieces to be really good and and may well find itself in that discussion down the road, but I don't think we can have it quite yet, especially, 2 months removed from Jim Knowles and Chip Kelly being on this coaching staff.
Yeah. Yeah, I echo what you guys say. I think I like the staff. I think the staff has a chance to be very, very good. But high bar to clear to be the best Ohio State tech. We've had some excellent ones.
From an energy standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint, from a youth standpoint, from a long-term upside standpoint, if this staff was going to stay together for 10 years, I think you'd have a really something special to build around. And to the Ryan Day coaching tree, I think 10 years from now is going to look pretty special because of this staff. But I also think it's just too early to guess that they're ahead of those guys.
Yeah. They are energetic. There's no doubt. And I think there's all kinds of potential. Shad would like to know from you, Berm, is Hero Kanu in the building?
No. We actually, when we were leaving the
Which building?
Yeah, I mean, he's in Columbus. He's been in Columbus this week. He's celebrating spring break. He told me, I asked him about this specifically, so this isn't me just postulating. I did ask Hero on Tuesday. I sent him a text that, hey, people are wondering. He said, I'm just here to see my friends and get my stuff. So I don't think it's anything to be worth monitoring. When we were leaving the Woody Hayes Athletic Center on Wednesday, Austin and I were driving out. Hero was at the front door of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, standing there peering into the window.
No. Don't do it like that.
He wasn't doing that. He was out front talking to his former teammates, but he's not allowed inside of the building. So the long answer is absolutely not. The short answer is no. He's not in the building. He's on the outside doing this.
I do think that
it's kind of weird though, right? It's kind of weird.
Columbus is the San Diego of the Midwest. Where else would you possibly want a spring break?
That's a great point. It's not a bad. It was kind of warm for 2 days this week too, so good timing.
Not anymore. So
yeah.
maybe Hero can go back and enjoy that. I'm sure nicer weather in Austin, but his name has come up a lot because I think Bill, I don't know that we glossed it over, but you also don't normally hear Ryan Day specifically talk about players who exit via the transfer portal and rehash it. I think that one, I speculate that Ohio State was caught a little bit by surprise there. And now that either way they're talking about is that was a pretty significant loss, especially you look at the depth at defensive tackle. His name is coming up a lot and not just for spring break reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I was caught off guard by it because it made a whole lot of sense that he was going to have a pretty significant role on this team this year. And I'm not entirely sure that his role will be any different at Texas than it would have been at Ohio State. Obviously, there are more considerations than that when a kid decides to transfer. But yeah, it doesn't seem like Ohio State was prepared for that one. Not that they're hyper worried about being able to replace him, but they knew they were losing 4 really good defensive linemen to the NFL, and then you lose a fifth who you thought had some real potential on top of that. It does kind of wreck your plans a little bit. That's why I think all of us might believe that they'll at least take a peek at what's available at defensive tackle in the transfer portal. Not to say they'll definitely add one, but when you lose a guy who's at the very least going to be a key depth piece like Hero Kanu was going to be, you're kind of forced into that position. Even if, a couple of guys pop this spring, you still might want another guy there just for numbers.
Ryan Day specifically mentioning Hero's name in his first press conference after like the offseason felt very strange to me. Like, I don't know that I can recall him without being asked directly about a specific transfer like Kyle McCord in the past. I don't think I've ever heard him just voluntarily mention the name of a departed Buckeye. So it did feel like a little bit of that sucked for us because we weren't expecting it, but that's the world we live in. I did ask Hero. Well, I'll be clear and transparent in my conversation with America here. I said, we still don't know why you left, and then he never responded to that. So.
Didn't get an answer to that one. Not really a surprise. He doesn't owe anyone an answer to that. It's up to him. That's
Austin is a beautiful city, a great town. It's Columbus, Texas. Everyone knows that.
They have a lot in common. Although they do try and steal soccer teams away, so you can't really trust many people who live there. Outside Austin, though, like maybe 45 minutes south, you're good there. Head on down to New Braunfels and Green. Only trustworthy people there. Fun one from John Ahern, the two-parter. First was, can we tease who else is going to be on 20 Forever? Anyone who did anything for the national champions is on the guest list, and we were striving to get them. We were planning to have G. Scott as one of the next ones on that list to look ahead to that. We've had that set up, pushed it back a couple days, which is why we wound up with a Freaky Friday mailbag. Berm is going to try and bring out the tears from G. Scott. We'll see if he succeeds. I've got my money on Berm on that one. And then he wants to, he said he's got a fun one here. Prediction time. Will Jeremiah Smith end his career on the Mount Rushmore of the greatest Ohio State football players of all time? Obviously, so many great players have played here in different eras, so I figured it's a fun exercise to run through. He has the talent, should have the production, and already has some legendary moments that cement him as a legend after just one season. Fun to think about how highly he will be regarded when his time here is over. That's tough. Even just cracking the Mount Rushmore of wide receivers, which I think we could safely project is in the cards there, to be on the list of the best 4 Ohio State players of all time. That's a high bar to clear. Berm, where would you play around with this one?
See, I hate it because we're all really prone to recency bias, and I think that informs a lot of what we say when it comes to comparing people historically. But as far as everything that makes a great Buckeye, an all-time great Buckeye, like Jeremiah Smith certainly has the recipe for that. He's already knocked off the biggest thing on that list, which is winning the national championship, because it's hard to really include people in that list who haven't, unless they've done something exceptional like Archie Griffin with 2 Heismans, or Orlando Pace being a runner-up for the Heisman as a offensive tackle and a 3-year starter and all that stuff at offensive tackle. But yes, I mean, I've never slowed down the hype train on Jeremiah Smith, and I don't feel like starting now. As long as he plays the next 2 years and is as productive as he was last year, I don't think that conversation's too early or premature at all, because he is the most talented receiver that Ohio State's ever had. And if you go back even beyond the last 5 years of Ohio State football history, the wide receiver position is as good as there's been any school in the country. And I can't think of a receiver who has a chance to be more impactful from a cultural standpoint, from a football standpoint, from the NFL success standpoint than Jeremiah Smith. So I would Mount Rushmore has 4 heads on it, right? So, but if we're just going there's been a lot of players at Ohio State, so I don't know if it's only 4 players, but if we were talking about who is the most likely, when history looks back on the Buckeyes football program, who's the receiver most likely to represent Ohio State on the all-time Mount Rushmore, I think Jeremiah Smith is as fine a choice as any.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to make it sound like it'd be easy to get to that level, because it's not at Ohio State, but because I think he's going to win a Heisman Trophy. He's 4th in the odds right now on FanDuel going into the season.
Only 4th?
Yeah, I mean, fourth in the preseason odds for a receiver is very good.
I thought he might be number 1 or number 2.
Number 1 is
it's going to be Arch.
Garrett Nussmeier and Arch have the same odds. at plus 800, then Cade Klubnik, and then Jeremiah Smith at plus 1200, which might not be a bad wager. If you are a betting man, I'm not allowed to vote or bet on the Heisman. I think he will. I believe that he'll probably leave Ohio State with a Heisman Trophy, and if he does, he'll be a Heisman Trophy and a national champ, and that probably puts him in that echelon of Ohio State player. I don't know that you can get there without it. I think you need the individual accolades and or a championship, and he could have both. So I think he's got a very good chance of getting there.
Yeah, he's certainly going to be in that conversation. All right, we've got a couple practices to, again, almost real football. So we've got a few players that we're getting asked about in here, starting with what Josh wants to know. What are your thoughts on guys like Jason Moore and Gabe Van Sickle? Could they make an impact at all this year, or are they not quite ready yet? Last year proved how important O-line and D-line depth is, and haven't heard much discussion on these two in the first week of spring ball. Curious on your thoughts. Bill, I know that you mentioned Gabe Van Sickle the other day, sort of working with the twos.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked about Jason Moore. It looked like some physical development. He was moving well with the defensive tackle. So we've glossed over that a little bit. I would say if I had to pick between those two, that Jason Moore is probably much closer to contributing for Ohio State than Gabe Van Sickle.
Yeah, I think that's right. You'd have to go through probably 4 or 5 interior offensive linemen before you got to Gabe Sickle, which is fine. He's only in his second year. I would say like he looks a little further along physically than I thought he might. I can't remember. So on Monday he was out there with the second group, for whatever that's worth. I don't think it means much, but and I think that was the same way on Wednesday. So he's like in that mix to be, I guess, at least on paper, like a backup guard, but I think there'd be some shuffling there if Ohio State actually had to figure out some depth at the guard position. Jason Moore, I think, is far more important to Ohio State's success in 2025 for all the defensive tackle depth reasons we've already discussed sort of ad nauseum. But it's about time for a guy going into his third year for that to happen for him anyway, but he just so happens to be in a position that like really needs it too. So I don't know that he's feeling any pressure per se, but I think that there's a lot of hope in the building that he's ready to go because the defense definitely needs it.
There was a lot of positive conversation about Gabe Van Sickle last year, October, November, but he's a guy that didn't enroll till last May. So I don't think that it's reasonable to expect that he's competing too highly for Ohio State right now when it comes to entering the two deep, especially because we've talked at length about how much talent they have at guard and on the inside. But he is probably like on the Austin Sareveld plan or Austin Sareveld like discussion, I think, where people like are going to look back and be, hey, we probably should have talked about him a little bit more because he's actually a really good athlete and a really, he's a player that came from a high school where he didn't get talked about much. He was committed to Northwestern prior to being at Ohio State. I don't think people really paid much attention when he did commit and flip from the Wildcats prior to the 2024 season. So probably not yet, but he's not a guy that has shown up and given anyone a reason to write him off, which I think by this point in a career, we've seen that happen with guys like Miles Walker and others in the last few years, where not even them. If we go back to Grant Schmidt or go back to the kid from Michigan a few years ago, blonde kid, whose name is escaping me, was committed to Penn State for a while, came in the same class as
Grant Toutant.
Yes.
Yeah, players like that. We've seen players written off by the coaching staff or heard rumblings from the coaching staff after a year or a year and a half of a player being there, where it's like, okay, this kid probably isn't going to make it. That's not been the case with Gabe Van Sickle at all. Why was Grant Toutant's name just escaping me like that? It was like I could feel it running around in my brain.
Well, you have a lot of names rattling around there. Sometimes you have to let some go. Yeah. You have too many.
I got my Grant Schmidt and my Grant Toutant committed.
Too many
flip-flopped.
Too many Grants. John would like to know, I like this question as well, should we be thinking more about Max Clare taking snaps and or touches from Brandon Inniss as opposed to Will Kazmarek or Bennett Christian? He sent a second follow-up. Is there a world where Inniss is RB3, don't think that's the case, or plays hybrid, which I do think is the case, and gets some running back touches? I mentioned this the other day when we were having that conversation about, Claire in comparison to Will Kazmarek. I think they're going to be asked to do separate things. But if Max Claire is doing some, slot work and is really involved, I think that does maybe more directly impact Brandon Inniss. And I went back and re-listened earlier this week to Ryan Day's conversation, and he mentioned specifically in a conversation about the 105 scholarship numbers that maybe that means Brandon Inniss has to be able to train in multiple spots and line up in the backfield and take touches. And I don't think that conversation happened by accident. And I know that this is the time of year where we talk about dual training and guys who can fill multiple roles. And I will talk probably for the next 7 months about Brandon Inniss being a threat out of the backfield, just like I did Emeka Ibuka before him or Jackson Smith and Jigba before that. We did see that some with Emeka. I would have liked to seen it even more. I wonder if that will actually happen with Brandon Inniss in a level that I would like to see.
Maybe he'll have a better chance because his position coach is calling the plays. Maybe that'll help him out. No, I think you'll see Brandon in a bit of a hybrid role. And I do think the Max Claire conversation is more of a slot receiver conversation than it is in my tight end. I think it does almost make sense to think of like Will Kazmarek and Bennett Christian as one position, and maybe Max Claire and whoever else the receiver might be in the slot as another position. Claire will play in line sometimes, and he played in line, I want to say 60% of the time, I think, at Purdue. So it wasn't like he didn't do it, and he still did it more than he was split out. But, a lot of tight ends are playing in line like 90% of the time, and he wasn't doing that either. So, it makes it a little hard to figure out exactly what the offense is going to look like, because you could quickly talk yourself into a couple of these guys moving around and doing different things, which I'm sure is really exciting for the coaching staff, but makes it kind of difficult to project exactly what that's going to look like when we're still so far away from the season.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think that there's only one football, and obviously Max Claire was brought into Ohio State to be a difference maker because it's not a position that the Buckeyes had a significant need to address this offseason. But it's when you saw an opportunity to upgrade, you have to take it. Brandon Inniss is a player that we all have a lot of expectation for, but as we talked about on the show earlier this week, what I love about a guy like Brandon Inniss is that it doesn't matter how many touches he gets as much as, because that's not the way he's going to impact the team the most. But certainly Ryan Day doesn't mention things on accident, as Austin just said. So unless Caleb Downs is playing running back, then why not?
Yeah, he did say last spring that Caleb Downs is going to play running back. So
I was going to say, I have to correct myself a little bit that sometimes he says something and it actually doesn't mean anything. And that was the Caleb Downs midsummer extravaganza, which I still think would be fun to see, but would probably not be the greatest use of anyone's time or energy. All right, last one, and we'll get out of here. Thanks again to all the questions. We couldn't get to every single one that you sent us. We'd be here all day, although Berm's fine with that. He doesn't ever want to stop recording. Rick Gazando, I realize Day won't name a starter until the fall, so he probably is going to string things along. Do you think there's any danger that one of the quarterbacks sees the writing on the wall this spring and transfers out?
Sure. Well, I think that would only apply to one quarterback, and that would be Lincoln Kienholz, because I don't like Tavian St. Clair. I don't think he'll be going anywhere. And if the writing's on the wall, I think the writing says Julian Sayin is quarterback one. So, I think it's a possibility, but we've discussed this, right? Like I think there's actually a lot of benefit for Lincoln to stick around, even if he thinks he's not going to be the starter at Ohio State. One, because where would you be guaranteed the start if you decided to go somewhere after spring ball? He still has 3 years of eligibility left. It's not the worst thing in the world to be Ohio State's second quarterback. So there are a lot of compelling reasons to stay, not the least of which are financial too. Yes, it's a possibility, but I'm probably more in the lane of expecting all three of these guys to be on the roster in the fall, no matter what happens.
I am too, and it's not necessarily because I don't worry about like writing on the wall. This is something that Austin has talked about in the past, and I think it's worth mentioning. As we sit here, it's March 21st of 2025. Lincoln Kienholz has still only had one full year at Ohio State. The odds of him transferring somewhere at the end of April and becoming the starting quarterback there, especially, unless it's a place that is a significant step down competition-wise, the odds of him walking in somewhere else and being the starting quarterback right away are still pretty low. And I think that he stands to gain a lot more, both financially by staying at Ohio State and down the road by the value that he would gain for another program if he had another year at Ohio State. Why would you don't gain anything extra by leaving Ohio State at that point? So the question is, I think for me, is there a danger that one of the quarterbacks sees the writing on the wall and leaves? Yes. The question is, do we think that Ohio State is intentionally going to withhold naming a starting quarterback in order to mitigate the odds of that sort of upheaval on the roster? I don't think they are, because I really do think, looking at this position group, you have 3 guys that have never played at Ohio State for any substantial time. They're all pretty much in the same boat. So I think we all assume Lincoln Kienholz will end up backing up Julian Sayin, but anything can happen between now and August 20th. Do you guys think Ryan Day has that thought in his head at all? That the reason you don't go full speed ahead with Julian is because you don't want to risk upsetting the apple cart with him?
I don't think so. Yeah. And I don't think that there's really great benefit to handling your roster that way. And word travels pretty fast. And these guys sometimes have similar agents or go to the same camps in the summer. And like, well, this is what they said. They misled me and it didn't work out. You develop a quick bad reputation in a hurry if you handle your roster that way at quarterback. So I don't think that it would benefit Ohio State. And I think the tough love and tough conversations and pecking order, like, everyone's going to know where they stand as they go. Like, the writing will be on the wall one way or the other. You can't fool the locker room. The tape doesn't lie. All those cliches exist and are true for a reason. But if you're telling Lincoln Kienholz, and this is from the outside, I'm not involved, obviously, you're important. Ohio State's going to spend this amount of money on a backup quarterback. Currently, that would be you. Like, would you like that money? Would you like to continue to be developed? We can use your dual threat ability, your rushing ability, your strength, your speed, maybe in some certain situations that Julian Sayin can't do. Again, this is the hypothetical under our assumption that Julian Sayin is the starting quarterback. I just don't. I think that whether you name it publicly or not, everyone's going to know. And if you just outline, this is what we think the benefits are, this is what we see both financially and in terms of competition on the field for you in this year, would you like to do that or not? My sense in covering Lincoln Kienholz over the last 2 years is that he would appreciate that level of frankness and probably sign up for that role in a heartbeat. He wants to compete. He wants to start. But I think that there's also a very good head on his shoulders. It's like, maybe you're not ready to go start at Iowa or Wisconsin at the end of April. And if you take this year and you continue to develop and Ohio State builds a role for you that you want, or you step in if needed, that's great. I mean, that's a real bonus. And I think it works out well for everybody personally. Now, we are in a spot in college football where you cannot make ironclad predictions about what is going to happen with NIL and the transfer portal. So I won't. But I will say I'd be very surprised if Lincoln Kienholz in a month's time changes his mind about this plan, because he had to have made this decision in January thinking that it was a 12-month decision, not a 3-month decision. That is my read on the situation.
Yep, I agree with all that. And I think they pride themselves way too much on the transparency of their quarterback process to be deceitful along the way. So I don't think they'll name a starter in spring because they don't have to. But I also don't think. I guess I don't want to be confusing when I say, like, even if Ryan Day has an inkling that it's going to be Julian Sayin at the end of spring ball, the fact that he wouldn't name it, I don't think is to string a guy along. I just think it's a part of their process too, just as much as the transparency. It's like they named their starting quarterback in August, and that's kind of how it's always been, even through varying degrees of how obvious it might be who that starter will be. So I think they'll be transparent like they always have, and that they'll probably end up keeping all 3 guys, and then maybe even still look to add a 4th, because I think you probably either a 4th or maybe more walk-ons or something. I think just they need more practice bodies than what they currently have. But that
4th quarterback is currently Ryan Day. So
Yeah, yeah, right. Like Carlos Lachlan was throwing passes on Monday and Ryan Day was throwing passes on Wednesday. They need another arm or two. But whoever that might be isn't going to impact the standing of the three guys who are currently here on scholarship.
Have you guys ever been to a comedy club where they make you like turn in your cell phone when you walk in the door and you have to put it in they're not allowing people to have them in the crowd?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You think that they should do that with car keys at the University of Georgia from now on? Like, let's just eliminate. No one down there can have a car anymore.
There's a real opportunity for a cottage industry to spring up down in Athens, Georgia, of like just Uber specifically for Georgia football players.
Yeah, I mean, why would you not do it at this point? Just head down there and pass out cards.
I think they should have like sort of like reading buddies for Georgia football players, but they're just their personal drivers. Like another student on campus that's like, I love football. I want to see the Dogs go win a title. I'm going to drive around this player all year, wherever he wants to go, whenever. And heck, Georgia could even pay them, put them on staff. There's no limit to the size of the coaching staffs. Like put them on the payroll.
The only limit is to not have the coaching staff sleeping with the recruiting staff, sleeping with the players. Right.
Well, the only limit is the speed limit, but they don't care about that either. So great question, Berm. A good one and a fun one to think about throughout this weekend. Hope everybody enjoys it. Full March Madness, minus the Buckeyes. Lots of basketball to watch. Lots more spring football to talk about. And
the Lady Buckeyes are in the basketball NCAA tournament.
They are, and they are at home.
Them.
So Berm will be there covering that for us this weekend. Look for his coverage of the women's basketball tournament on the podcast. Thanks for following along with us all week. We will be back on Monday. More spring football, week number 2 at Ohio State next week. Enjoy your weekend. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I am Austin Ward. We'll see you later.